Hello, everybody. So I was getting ready for some fall classes, and this coming fall, I will be teaching software development with Java. And in that class, the final project is going to be a Spring Boot application where they have to make a small web application using JSP pages and do a simple API, have some sort of data connected with their thing, send out an API, which these two things are very easy to do on with a Spring Boot application. And as I was getting ready, I decided I would go ahead and, one, to make a video to practice so that I'm ready to do it when I get in the classroom, and two, to have everything that's expected in their final project uh, in one location on YouTube tutorials so they can go look up the basic components there, and then they just have to add their customizing uh, functionality instead of digging around and through looking through YouTube tutorials or written out tutorials and lots of different places. They'll have just one spot to see what's expected for the final project. Uh, I I decided not to include database functionality, so not connect to a MySQL. We will be seeing that earlier in the class, so there might be an addendum at the end of the video, just adding a MySQL connectivity or SQLite, some sort of database connectivity. I'm not sure about that. It won't be part of the project, but I thought I had a couple good reasons to make a video, so we will be using NetBeans in the class. The basically uh, any of the major IDEs that work good for Java have the same functionality. The buttons are just in a different place, but in general, they have the same labels on the buttons. They're just in a different place. So hopefully, you can still follow along if you regularly use another IDE. Um, so yeah, so let's get started. I have NetBeans opened up here and ready to start a project, but we don't want to start it right here. That's what Spring Boot is for. It's for getting us those project starters. So jumping over to Spring Boot here. So if we go to a browser, and the easiest way to deal with it, most IDEs have it built in, but the easiest way to deal with it and to make sure you're up to date is to navigate to the site start.spring.io. So start spring.io. This will give you your Spring Boot starter files, and just choose some settings from here. It's going to be Java. We're going to be doing it in Maven. Um, most of the class will be most of the class is going to be in Ant because for classroom examples, it's a lot easier to dig through those folders. But we're going to talk about Maven a lot, and I'm going to point out that they should be using Maven in situations where it's not a classroom lecture, and they're not expected to be digging through the folders constantly, just occasionally. But we'll be focusing on Maven in the class. You'll just choose whatever the latest version is. I'm making this video on July 1st, so the latest version is 3.1.1. The ones that have snapshot are sort of in development, beta test things. So um, don't need to go. We don't need to be a beta tester for anything. So choose the latest version. Then give it some sort of unique name for a Maven project. And the students in my class, we will go over where the names come from and basically just it needs to be unique. So a common thing is to take your company website and turn it around because websites have to be unique. So if we put the comma in front, we know we still have something unique. And for this demo, I'm going to make a small tip calculator. That's a good go-to example. At least most Americans are familiar with the act of tipping, so there's not uh, whole lot of stumbling blocks in the logic of what we're doing. Just a real quick way to look at the code. And in my plan, it also adds to get the API part. I was just going to send out the restaurants I go through every week. I have like 30 restaurants I cycle through for my 1 night a week going out. Uh, so I was just going to send those out as it, but we just need to see the syntax for an API and the syntax for the web application made with JSP pages. So a nice little tip calculator worked for that. So I'm going to call it eats, something for that. Some sort of that general description will be good. And even though we're building a web application, I'm going to go ahead and do it as a packaging as jar for now. And for the students in my class, when I recommend this video to you, go ahead and do it as a jar file. And when I'm grading, that's one of the things I'm going to do is build it and run the jar file as well as dig through all your source code and stuff like that. So go ahead and build the jar file, but yeah, we'll talk about the difference all the way through class. And what you're choosing here is the earliest version. I currently have Java 20 installed, but um, if these videos don't seem to be taking up too much time and we launch it on Docker, um, the JDK for 17 is a lot more stable on Docker. 20 still has a few little glitches when we launch that as a Docker container. So I'm going to go with 17, which is the earliest, and this just needs to be the earliest version you're concerned with it running on. So that's the basic project properties. But what does our project depend on? And this is where the things like Maven and Gradle and other stuff like it come in really helpful. There's quite a few. We'll type most of them in because I want to go over how to type them in. Actually, we need 3, so I'll type 2 in, but I want to go ahead and do the starters. So in general, you want to start with a Spring Web if you're going to make a web application. Includes RESTful stuff. Basically, it does a REST API right out of the box. When we click this, the only thing this lacks from being a finished REST API is telling the Java virtual machine where the main class is and putting the data to be transmitted across that API. There's a couple more we'll need, but I'm going to type those into the POM file when we get to it to kind of show both of them. This will give us a good starter file, and that's what Spring Boot is for. It gives us these project starters so that we can get our application up and going a lot quicker. So whenever you get that set up, Java, Maven, whatever the latest version is that does not say snapshot, give a group name, which needs to be unique for Maven. So some unique name that'll show up on the way through class, and a name for this particular project. And jar and 17 will probably be good. And just choose the Spring Web dependency. If your project has database connectivity, you might want to go ahead and choose the JDBC. If you just search for data, Spring Data, JPA, that'll be a good inclusion if you're going to use a database in your final project. But when you're ready, just hit generate, and very quickly it'll download a zipped folder for you. So we can go back over to NetBeans, and we could go unzip that folder and just use the open button. I usually like to go to File and Import Project and From Zip, and then we can just browse to the Downloads folder somewhere here. There it is, and choose that zip folder that we just got from the start.spring.io. Wait for it to load in. Should be pretty quick. If you're used to Maven projects, you might have noticed that seemed a little too quick, and that's because it hasn't been built yet. So it included the main it included our main class, but knowledge of that main class isn't included in Maven yet. So we need to set this, but well, I'll go ahead and look at the problem instead of just warning you about it. If we right click on the project and scroll down to properties, under run, and choose a main class, if we go to browse for one, oh, it is there. A lot of times that will not be there. This will be blank the first time. So I was trying to point out an error, but it didn't have the little error. It's blank the first time because we haven't downloaded any Maven dependencies. So usually what you want to do is hit run just one time, which is going to fail. But before it fails, it will build the project at least once. So we'll have our whole list of dependencies. And once we have that, if that main project wasn't there the first time, if the main class for the project wasn't there the first time, right click on it, go to properties, and under run, it will definitely be there the second time after you've built it. So sometimes it shows up at first, and if it doesn't show up there at first, it'll just say no classes to choose from or empty list or something. just run it once and let it fail, because it will go ahead and build the dependencies before it fails. So now we have that main class launched. We should be able to just hit run. And this is the beauty of Spring Boot. Um, all of those dependencies that were in that starter file were brought in, and it already started a Tomcat server on port 8080 for us. So let's go see what's there. Absolutely nothing right now, but uh, it's a nice kind of nothing that's there right now. So over in the browser, which I had to do with a keyboard shortcut because it messes up the video recording. Uh, if that suddenly seemed like a jump there. If we go to our localhost port number 8080, we will see this nice little error message. Better than just like the not existing page. So like if we tried to go to 808, we'd get this generic message from Chrome. So it's a little bit nicer, and this is actually in those Spring Starter files. So we can go customize that. So how far into the video are we? 11 minutes. So this is pretty much ready for an API. So we can probably fit an API in this first video. And you want to hit the stop button, whichever IDE you're using. In Eclipse, it's like over here, right next to the tab. And in IDEA, it's on the tab over here. But whichever IDE you're using, make sure you know where the stop button is, because if we try to run it again when the previous run has port 8080 occupied, we'll get errors because the port's occupied, obviously. So let's add a quick API to this. So the first thing we're going to need is our data class. So I'm going to come up here, make sure you expand source packages, and then all the folders down to where the main is, and just create a new Java class for our data object, our data class here. So for the example here, I'm just going to make a list of, did I spell that right? Restaurant. There we go. I'm just going to make a list of restaurants. And for your final projects in the class, this is one of the ones that's going to be a little bit uh, more extended. So we're just looking at the base functionality here. But you're going to have several data classes and methods that will do more than just return the data here. But we need some information about a restaurant. So I'm going to create an integer ID, sort of a standard practice every time we're dealing with data, right? Need a name of the restaurant, private string name, private string description, and private integer rating. Some sort of indication whether it's a good restaurant or something. I'm just going to put those in arbitrarily. They do not affect the local restaurants that I go to. Just have some data. And now this does need to be a bean, because putting it in JSON format and returning it as the REST API is all built into that starter package we put. It's already in these dependencies we loaded in, or that Spring Boot loaded in for us. So we need to make sure we have a bean, which means we need the default constructor. So add in the constructor, and in NetBeans, it's Alt Insert to do that. And when we add a constructor, Java will not put the default constructor, but a bean requires it. Now I need the constructor I'm actually going to use. So I'm just going to do a quick example. So I'm going to select all of those, generate that. And generating this constructor prevents this one from being generated in the background. That's why I do that. And for beans, we have to have at least the getters. So again, Alt Insert and put in the getters. You might want to go ahead and do setters too, because it's just a couple of clicks. Generate those. And we need the toString, which I don't think omitting toString would cause a problem here. I'll just go with the generic string in NetBeans. So select all four of them, generate that. It's going to return that. I don't think it would cause a problem here, but I have seen where omitting that from your data class can cause problems in Spring Boot applications with certain dependencies. I don't think any of the dependencies we loaded in here would have problems with it, but it's something to watch out for, and it's just a couple clicks to go ahead and put it in anyway. So there's our data class, our data. So we'll make a couple of those and send them back across the REST API. So once again, we'll need another Java class. Right-click on the package where it's going to go, create a new Java class, and I'm going to call this data controller. That seems like a good name for our generic example here. The right package and everything. Make sure it's going into the right package, or add in the import lines. By the time the class gets up to working on the final project, you should know what all that stuff is. And to do this, this is going to be our REST API controller. So we need the Spring. We need to access something for Spring this time. Spring MVC to be in particular. Whoops, didn't mean to click that. We need something from the Spring MVC, which is our the web applications built from the Spring framework. And what we need is the REST controller. So it's a REST API controller. And in NetBeans, Control-Shift-I does the import, unless you set that to be fully automatic. I set it for the have to click to get the import, so it doesn't happen automatically, because sometimes we want to choose from a list, which in NetBeans is Control-Shift-I to import the packages. So now we just need one quick method. Public, it needs to return a list of those restaurant objects, which I think I spelled pretty wrong. As I'm looking at that now, it looks spelled wrong. And list is an interface, so we will need to instantiate it to something concrete, but something that has the methods required in the list interface. Sets up that shape of plug for those who have had me in class, and I refer to physical plugs like USB and power cables. And this is our virtual version of a plug. Array list, linked list, there's a whole bunch of them that are concrete versions of that. So we'll get to that in a second, and I'm just going to call this local restaurant. And don't need any parameters. I'll create the list, a list of restaurant objects. I'll just call it list. I'm not feeling very creative right now, and I guess an array list will work. Array list or concrete, we can actually instantiate those. Come down a couple lines, and I'll return that list to get rid of all the little lines. And once again, Control-Shift-I to handle those imports. Now we just need a couple of those. So I'm going to do list.add a new restaurant. And I kind of cycle through the same restaurants every week myself. So what's our constructor have? It has an ID, name, description, and rating. So ID number 1. The one closest to my house is an Applebee's, so I'm there quite often. Description, neighborhood bar and grill. And a rating, this is arbitrary. It does not accurately reflect the Applebee's right around the corner from my house, but so there's our local restaurant. I guess an address would have been good too, but this will work for the example. Actually, I don't know why I'm typing that again. I'm going to copy that, and I'll just do 3 of them. Also, let's see, 2 and 3. I also regularly go to Chili's. Can't remember the Chili's logo. Good food. That's a good description for it. And Outback is the 3rd one that I go to most often. Those I usually cycle through those each week. Go to one of them each week, and their commercial I saw recently. No rules, just right. That's their logo. Let's change these ratings. Again, arbitrary. If anybody that works at those restaurants happens to see these videos, that does not accurately reflect it. It's just to have some data. So now that we have that, save that, And this is the list we want to return with our REST API. So we can just use the Spring MVC again to get a mapping for that. Let's request a mapping, and I'll just map it to one URL. We could put an array here and do several, and I'll say slash eateries. Sounds like a good thing to put in the address. Import that, and that's basically all we have to do to make an API. So if we run this, there's already nothing changed in the build, so loaded pretty quick and started the Tomcat server. So from where it's at in the taskbar, I can push Windows 1, get over to Chrome, and check out localhost port 8080. Still no homepage, but we did add eateries. And there's our data sent back. So you can see building a REST API is really, really quick with Spring Boot. I have an extension here. I have the JSON formatter extension in Chrome. You might be looking at it like this, which is how we would actually want to read this into another program to do stuff with that API, right? We put in that URL and into, like, say, a Python script that goes to an interface, a GUI on our local computer, and we get all this data back to work with. But this little JSON formatter makes it look nice in Google Chrome. So that's all it takes to make an API. Very, very quick and easy, 21 minutes, and I was trying to explain stuff along the way, and that's a big part of the project. With your final project in the class, you will have more data to work with. You will have the data you're retrieving. You'll have several types of data objects and several different mappings to customize what data comes back. But that is a straightforward extension on this simple example. Next up, we need to see a homepage. So looks like this video is up to about 22 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this recording, and I will do the JSP pages in the next video. I'll see you then.